Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Movie Commentary Podcast. It is the podcast in which we watch movies and we talk about movies. And first off, I want to say I know I've been probably late on this episode. It's been kind of busy and hadn't had a lot of chance to record, edit any episodes lately. It's just been busy schedule, but I got time now, so I'm recording this episode. And this is an episode I'm really excited to do. I'm going to do the 1975 thriller Jaws, the second feature film directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dryfeuss, and a handful of other actors and actresses. Those are the main three, though. Now, this is actually going to be kind of the first... Now, first off, one thing I'll say, this episode is actually going to... Basically, like, for this weekend, I'm going to, like, produce 2 episodes. I'm going to watch Jaws now, and then immediately after this, I'm going to do an episode on The Shining, and that will probably be released either at the same time or maybe, like, a day or so later. And then it's going to kind of, like, follow the trend, like, for the rest of October, like, just kind of the whole theme of just, like, doing horror movies. I know, like, because The Shining's obviously a horror movie. I know some people don't consider Jaws a horror film, but some also do. Some people find it extremely frightening. So, without further ado, let us start the movie. Now, the one thing I really like about Jaws, it's actually I find really cool. It's like they especially I'm watching this on the Blu-ray version. They have the old-fashioned Universal logo, like from the 70s and mid 80s, which I always really liked. So starting the movie now, we got the credits coming through. Like Zanuck and Brown, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, who produced the film. Then they got the 3 main title actors. Then we have the main theme, the dun 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 dun. It's a bit of an introduction. That's probably, I'd say, one of the most iconic film scores of all time. I'd say this was probably the film score that got not Steven Spielberg, but John Williams on the map. Because I think before this, John Williams he had done a lot in film and TV, composing, doing film scores and whatnot. But I mean, I think this was really, I would believe this is his first like iconic movie score. Because I mean, I think as a lot of people know, I believe, honestly, John Williams, he's probably the most, he is the most, what's the word? Recognized, accomplished composer of film scores, basically, of all time. I mean, basically, I would say, if you were to compile a list of the top most iconic film scores of all time, I think John Williams would, probably have most of those film scores on there. But it was kind of funny when he originally played the film score for Steven Spielberg, the simple dun 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 dun. I think he played it on the piano, and he played for Spielberg, and it was, and Spielberg thought it was, kind of a joke. So I mean, he, was actually like, John, okay, that's funny, John. Where's the actual film score? And then John Williams was like, that is the film score, and so. But it's also kind of an interesting, because I mean it actually kind of plays into, it's one of the things that makes, like, I think the film, it definitely elevates the film. I'll say that, and I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say with this next part, but it definitely will come in later on in the movie, and I'll try to explain it a little bit better. I know that's kind of vague, but So now we're watching the opening scene of Jaws. Chrissy Watkins and this other guy. I never knew what this other guy's name was, and they're running into the ocean off of Amity Island, and they are going for a little swim. So yeah, and he's apparently too drunk to get into the water. Now, it's actually kind of interesting. The woman that plays Chrissy Watkins here, her name is Susan Backlany. I believe at this time she was like I think, a stunt woman, stunt performer, and she also had done some other like I don't know. She was like some kind of like exotic performer. Like, I don't want to say like she was like a stripper or anything like that, but she did some like some interesting performance. Like, not that it was bad or like sensual or anything, but it was just from what I remember in the documentaries, a lot of the documentaries I read, she was just she did a lot of like just kind of unconventional like things. So again, that's not really specific on that. Now, it's really interesting. So this first scene here, we get the we get she starts getting pulled underwater and get kind of dragged around, and it's kind of that. So it's the first instance that there's something going on, and obviously as we'll learn, it's a shark. However, in this you don't see the shark, and that's going to become a theme throughout a lot of the movie is that you don't really even see the shark hardly at all until quite literally like the last like 40 minutes of the film. Because one of the things that Spielberg even stated that like he actually had the shark appear in this first opening scene here. Like, you'd see like the tail, the dorsal fin, like the conical nose, like basically you'd see a lot of the shark, but as we will talk about a lot in this movie, the mechanical shark that they had designed, the various mechanical sharks they had designed for this movie, simply just did not work. So, and that's actually really interesting. So she just got pulled under the water, but there was an interesting scene because like in the way that they did it, because like what they did was they actually had her like a harness like kind of hooked up to her body. And they had like basically like different ropes, like, and they had like ropes like kind of tied to her, and basically they had men, and the ropes would go like back to the beach, and they would basically like just pull her like to side, and according to, it was apparently very troubling, and I mean there kind of a scary time when they were filming it, because I mean one of the things that they said was like, I mean, if she was actually hurt, nobody would have known, because like she was supposed to be screaming, and that's what she was supposed to be doing there, so. She also apparently that scene was also when they dubbed the scene. Apparently Steven Spielberg and Susan were when they were dubbing it. Apparently, what Steven Spielberg did to Susan Backlany was he apparently had her lean her head back, and he poured water down her mouth while she screamed, which is technically known as waterboarding. Which it's more of a it's not something you would, I remember Richard Dryfeuss in a documentary said Steven is technically technically responsible for a war crime there. So of course this was the 70s, so I mean it was I wouldn't say more primitive ways, but I mean it's just more maybe less PC ways. So anyway, I've been talking a lot about that last scene. Oh darn it, we are now on to meeting Chief Brody and his family. Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider, his wife Ellen, played by Lorraine Gary, who was actually the wife of the Universal president Sid Sheinberg, who a lot of people will probably credit as this is the man that discovered Steven Spielberg. That's actually something he said will be put on his tombstone. And then obviously he's got his two sons. It's actually an interesting story of how Roy Scheider got the part of Chief Brody, because apparently he wasn't really even considered for the part of Chief Brody. I think at all, honestly, because I think at the time when Spielberg when they were going through it, or when they were trying to go through casting it, they had a lot of actors. One of the things about Jaws that Spielberg and the studios wanted to avoid was casting like big name like stars, like people that would, like bankable names. I mean, and they wanted well-known actors, and they wanted actors that had been established before. But I mean, they didn't want like somebody who was like, say like a Marlon Brando, or like a for instance Charlton Heston, who's very famous. He played Judah Ben-Hur in Ben-Hur. He played Moses in the Ten Commandments. He also played apparently a Michelangelo in a film. And he very well distinguished career in actor up until this point, and he was actually interested in playing the role of Chief Brody. Now, I will admit, I think knowing Charlton Heston, I think he would have done a really good job playing the role of Chief Brody. But I think, one of the things that they said is that his appearance was a little bit just too big for the film. I mean, it would have taken away from what Steven Spielberg said the main character of the film, which was the shark. Now, they also considered Robert Duvall. I think was also considered for the part. However, he wasn't interested. Now, I'll talk about this a little later. He was only interested in playing the role of Quint. However, Robert Duvall was considered a little too young to play the role of Quint. But anyway, back to Roy Scheider. So apparently, what ended up happening was that Steven Spielberg was basically at a dinner party, and he was kind of, apparently according to the story, he was a little upset and a little frustrated not being able to get the part of Brody cast. And all of a sudden, a stranger who happened to be Roy Scheider had walked up, and Roy Scheider, I believe he had just made the film The French Connection, which was a very well-received film, and Steven Spielberg had seen the film, and he knew about Roy Scheider from that. However, Roy Scheider came up to him. He's like, "Well, why are you? And he basically was like, Steven Spielberg was sitting alone at a dinner party, that kind of thing. And Roy Scheider was like, "Why are you sitting here by yourself?" And Steven Spielberg said, "Well, he basically told him the story of Jaws, and he told him the story of, how he was trying to get all these actors for Chief Brody and all that kind of stuff." But then Roy Scheider, I think he said, "I'd love to be in Jaws," and he basically said, "Well, I'm an actor. Why don't I play the part of Brody?" And I'm not gonna lie, I think it was quite literally that simple, and I think it really works. I mean, one thing I'll hit on the casting, some of the other casting, kind of later in the film, but Roy Scheider as Chief Brody is it's a great casting. I wouldn't say it's one of the great castings of the film. Roy Scheider just plays the role, I think, amazingly, and same for all the other two principal actors. I mean, Robert Shaw and Richard Dryfeuss. I mean, they just play their roles, I think, just magnificently. And I don't think the film would. I think had they had gone with other actors at the parts, I don't think the film would have been as good. Even if they had Roy Scheider and Richard Dryfeuss and say some other actor as Quint, I don't think the film wouldn't have been as nearly as successful. Now I just thought about this. Now it's actually really interesting. So I didn't know where I was going with that. I'm sorry. I was actually gonna kind of hit on the kind of the origin stories of the movie of the story of Jaws. Now, the story of Jaws is actually started off as a book. Jaws the movie is actually an adaptation of a book of the same title named Jaws, written by a man named Peter Benchley. And Peter Benchley had a whole bunch of inspirations for creating a book, creating the story of Jaws. I mean, he had the idea. He had seen a whole bunch of big sharks caught off of the shores of New York. I mean, he was kind of into. I think he was fascinated by sharks and shark attacks. I think he was also inspired by the 1916 New Jersey shark attacks, the Jersey Shore shark attacks, which are really which, if a lot of people have actually studied that, they're actually very similar to the events that take place in Jaws. However, I think the scale of the shark is bigger in Jaws, obviously. So, but anyway, so Peter Benchley writes this book, and he publishes it in 1974, and he never even thought it was going to be that much of a success. I mean, he thought he was honestly kind of like, nobody reads a story about a fish. Nobody reads it's a first novel, so who cares? I mean, that kind of thing, and he didn't really think anything of it. But somehow or some way, the film the book caught on, and it was on the New York Times best-selling list for 44 weeks. It was on there for quite a while there. Now, how it got to film, so going back to Richard Zanuck and David Brown, the producing duo that created produced the film, obviously, they I think what ended up happening was David Brown's wife, Helen Gurley Brown, was the literary editor of Cosmopolitan magazine. So David Brown kind of was in the know of the publishing world, the literary world. He basically was like, and he kind of was looking out for parts and movies to kind of and for books to look at adapting to film. And I think his wife kind of tipped him off to this book Jaws, and I think he read it. David, his partner Dick Zanuck, who's the son of legendary film producer Daryl Zanuck. And they both looked at the film, and they read the manuscript, I think, and even before it was published, and they loved the book, and they saw great potential in it, and they went to they went to buy go out and buy the rights to it, and I think they secured the rights for an undisclosed sum of money. I don't know how much money they got for it, so. But yeah, and it was kind of an interesting looking back on it, because David Brown, I remember in a documentary, he even said had they had read the book twice, they probably would have never made them. They probably would have never bought the rights, because there were some shark scenes in there that they had to have a shark do this, they had to have a shark chase people, they had to have a shark jump onto a boat, which for a lot of films, I mean, you can basically get like an animal trainer and train the film, train the you just basically wrangle up a film and train the animals and whatnot, but you can't really wrangle a great white shark, and you really can't train it either. So it's kind of they kind of have their tails in between their legs here. So now we're so basically what we have been talking over since I've kind of been talking. Chief Brody was he went to the beach. He saw the remains of Chrissy Watkins. Then he went to decided to go to I think an art supply store, and he went to go make some signs to paint beach close signs. Because he wanted to close the beaches down because of how, of the shark attack. And then the mayor, along with some of the other townsfolk, they came along and quite literally just shut down the idea of it, because they didn't really like that, because they're like, we need these summer dollars and all this kind of stuff, and we need we can't shut the beaches down, or else we'll be basically in financial ruin. So, and now they're at the beach, and we are about to see the next shark victim. And then it also is implied that the shark ate the dog Pippin, I do believe. And then the shark comes up, and then it snatches the Alex Kittner boy. So it's Alex Kittner, I think played by Jeffrey Voorhees, who was a 6-year-old. I think it was like a 10-year-old at the time. And you saw the shark for a little bit in the film. You kind of saw the shark for a little bit there. But you can only see kind of literally the dorsal fin, the tail, you can kind of saw a bit of the snout. The way that this scene was basically supposed to act is you were actually supposed to see a lot more of the shark kind of come out and kind of essentially chomp him down, on Alex Kittner. But however, Steven Spielberg, I think, thought of it was kind of too gruesome to show in the film, so he kind of edited it down. And also, I think the shark footage itself of the mechanical shark just never really looked that convincing. So, I think that's actually something that, for all this, however gory this movie is, I mean, Steven Spielberg actually kind of showed some restraint in, creating the film. So now there is a reward. So now Alex Kittner's mother, played by Martha's Vineyard native Lee Fierro, which is, again, a good touching point because, the film was basically filmed on Martha's Vineyard. However, they, basically Alex Kittner has been, taken by the shark, and now they are going to basically what's a town meeting, like I think it's like a town hall meeting or something like that. And apparently there's been a reward put out to capture the shark. So yeah, now we're going into this little board meeting here. Going back to what I said earlier about this being Steven Spielberg's only his second feature film that he ever directed. He had done, so this is again the second film he had ever made. He, up until this point, he had done a whole bunch of television work, I believe, for done a couple episodes of directing television. He made a made-for-TV film called Duel, which is basically about this man on a road trip who basically gets terrorized by basically a guy in a truck. So it's actually kind of funny because Steven Spielberg, looking back on it, he said one of the things that he wanted to make, the reason he wanted to make Jaws was because he actually saw a lot of parallels in the movie Duel to the movie Jaws, or to the story of Jaws. But Duel was made in 1971, and then in 1974, for the producing duo of Dick Zanuck and David Brown, he actually made the film the Sugarland Express, starring Goldie Hawn. And then kind of after that, I think right after he had made the Sugarland Express, he was I think looking for more films to direct and that kind of thing. And he had seen I think he'd been to a meeting with Dick Zanuck and David Brown, and he actually had seen a manuscript basically with the word Jaws, the four-letter word Jaws in front of it. And he was, intrigued because, Jaws, it could have been he even said it could have been a movie about, dentistry or something like that. And he read the book, and, he read the movie, read the manuscript, he loved it, and he wanted to direct it. However, at the time, they had a director who had been, who was kind of tied to the project at the time. I think the backstory was that when they bought the film rights, they had to they had to go with this film director, which was kind of funny because they ended up firing him because he basically would always call the shark whale. He thought he was making a movie about Moby Dick. He's like, the whale will do this and the whale will do that, and Dick Zanuck and David Brown were just like, nah, we're gonna fire this guy. So they fired him, and then they they brought on Steven Spielberg, who was actually, it was kind of funny. He originally wanted to do it hook, line, and sinker, and then he kind of flip-flopped on it a little bit, and he was like, I'm not terribly sure about this. And it actually was because there was some other scripts or some other film projects that he was interested in getting involved in, and it ultimately was Sid Sheinberg, who again, the husband of Lorraine Gary, who plays Ellen Brody, Chief Brody's wife in this film here. It was basically Sid Sheinberg who basically suggested, or in his words, he basically said, I basically told Steven that he should be making that other film, making Jaws instead of that other film. And, Steven Spielberg, as the production of Jaws went along, he kind of started to resent Scheinberg because the production of Jaws was a very tough production. I would say it was one of the most troubled I would say probably for the exception of maybe Apocalypse, the exception of Apocalypse Now, I'd say it's probably one of the most troubled productions of any film that actually became wildly successful. it was kind of like, it kind of goes with that trend, like, cause like you get 3 movies in the '70s that I kind of think about. Actually, I think 4: Jaws, Close Encounters, which is actually another Spielberg film, Star Wars, and then Apocalypse Now, were 4 films made in the '70s that had just awful, troubled productions, and yet came out at the backside to become, just amazing films. So, yeah. So now, I talked over the introduction of Quint, the supposed shark hunter, and basically he made himself known at the town hall meeting. He basically, like, he had drawn a picture of a shark on like a chalkboard, and he did like the nails on a chalkboard kind of introduction, which, I really couldn't imagine to doing that. That just doesn't sound, putting your nails on a chalkboard, yeah, doesn't sound very good. So yeah. So I think we got an important scene coming up here. This is a bit of a funny scene. The Chief Brody was yelling at his son to get out of like this little boat tied up to their dock, and his wife was kind of chastising him about it. But then his wife looked into a book and saw like a picture of a shark biting a shark biting the side of a boat, and then she started yelling at him to get out of the boat. So now this scene right here. So this is the scene we're at a dock. And basically you got these 2 fishermen, and they're taking this giant hunk of roast, and they're going to go basically hooking it up to a giant fish hook, and they're throwing it out to the sea and basically seeing if anybody will catch it. Now this scene is, I would say, very significant in the fact that it illustrates, I think in this one little scene, it illustrates why this movie is so successful, and why this movie, I think, is so, frightening to some people, because it's basically using all these, kind of stand-ins for the shark to kind of show the shark not being there. Because again, in this scene here, I mean, we're not going to see the shark. We're basically going to be merely implied of its presence. And, in the way that, they do it in this scene here, I think it is what makes the film, I think, a great film. Going back to what I said earlier, I mean, the mechanical sharks that they had made, because they made multiple mechanical sharks for the film, they very rarely worked. They worked somewhat, because obviously in the film here, they actually, you could see the shark, working there. But for a lot of the early production, I think it was finally later in production, they finally were able to get the shark to work. But earlier in production, when they were filming, these scenes right here, the shark wouldn't work. So they would have to come up with like creative ways of like basically implying the shark being there. And what they're showing here is that basically they're implying the shark by essentially they had like this buoy that was like a bobber, like a fish bobber, and basically they're showing the bobber like kind of going like being dragged all the way out, and then also it's being attached to like this pier. And then they're going to show like the pier kind of like turn back and start to like chase the man who's in the water swimming. So, and then that coupled with John Williams' amazing score, and that was what I was referring to earlier. John Williams uses the score to also imply that the shark is there, and this coupled with the fact that you don't see the shark, so you don't really know where it's at, and if it's even close to the man or not. You just see that there's this pier chasing after the man, trying to swim back to the dock there. That makes it really terrifying, and it's Steven Spielberg even said he really played into the theater of the unknown, the theater of the mind. That what you don't see is the more terrifying. Because you can. It kind of goes back to that psychology. You can handle what is in front of you. You can kind of conquer what's in front of you, but what you can't see is the more terrifying, and it's what your mind makes up is what's the more terrifying. So again, I think that's really that's I think it's early scene in the film, and it's just kind of it just kind of adds that the shark is out there, and it's a really powerful shark, the overall scene. But I think it's also just, I think that one scene there is basically if you were to point to one scene in the film Jaws and it'd be like, why does this film work so successfully? I'd say it's that scene right there, along with the a scene later in the film, which I will talk on later. We are now being introduced to Richard Dryfeuss, played by Matt Hooper. He just got helped onto the boat dock by Ben Gardner, a fisherman, played by a local Martha's Vineyard native named Craig Kingsbury, who actually became later the inspiration, part of the inspiration for the character Quint, not the inspiration for the character because he was in the book, but he was kind of the inspiration for how like Robert Shaw would like talk, like this is how Quint would talk, that kind of thing. Now, So Richard Dryfeuss being introduced as Matt Hooper here. So Steven Spielberg originally wanted Richard Dryfeuss to play the part of Matt Hooper. Now, it wasn't. He didn't look the part of what was described in the book. In the book, the role of Matt Hooper is described as like a blonde-haired, like California, beach goer kind of guy. Kind of like a California surfer kind of guy. Young, hip college student. But, and they actually apparently wanted the actor Jan Michael Vincent to play the part, the studio did, because, he looked like the part of Hooper in the book, but Spielberg saw Richard Dryfeuss, and he was the guy that was, he was, basically what, Spielberg had in mind for the part of Matt Hooper. Originally when Dryfeuss was offered the part, he declined the part, and basically what ended up happening was that Richard Dryfeuss said that he was basically in a sense kind of lazy, and that I don't really want to make the film, I'd just rather see it, and he turned them down. I believe 3 times he turned them down. He was he just didn't really want to do it. He was just like this is gonna be a terrible film to shoot, that kind of thing. And ultimately, what ended up happening was it's actually kind of really hilarious. What ended up happening, Richard Dryfeuss had actually adjusted his first. I believe it was his first major starring role was in the film The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, and Duddy Kravitz I think was released in it was 74, I do believe. And when Dryfeuss saw his performance on screen, he apparently thought he was the worst actor. He was, quote unquote, the worst actor in America, and he thought that if it was released, that he would never get a job again. So he essentially, after he saw that screening, he essentially called Steven and he begged him to get the part, as in Richard Dryfeuss's own words. Now, the irony is that The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz actually later became a very successful film, and Dryfeuss's performance was actually critically acclaimed in that film. So if he had really stuck to his guns, he really would have never made the part of Jaws, which, again, going back to what I had said earlier, I mean, if there's no Richard Dryfeuss in this film, I don't think it works properly. I mean, the 3 actors that make the main parts, they all hold this film up, and they all elevate it to something just, I think, otherworldly. I think it's the 3 actors, it's plus the thriller, the thrills, and the suspense of it all, and the way that it's made, and the authenticity, and but again, and I will stick to my guns on this. I mean, I don't think if there was another actor that played any of the 3 main roles, I mean, I don't think the film would have been as nearly as successful. I mean, I think honestly, if you would replace maybe another actor or actress, like, I mean, if you had like another actress to play the wife of play the role of the wife of Brody, or another actor to play the mayor, I mean, I think it would have been. I don't think the film would have suffered in quality. But if you had changed out Robert Shaw or Richard Dryfeuss or Roy Scheider, then I don't think the film works. And I also just noticed that all the 3 of the main actors' names, they start with R, so you got the 3 R's making the film here. Oh dear. So Matt Hooper, seeing that I just talked over here, so Matt Hooper went in and he had just examined the remains of Chrissy Watkins, and he came to the conclusion that it was indeed a shark that had that it was indeed a shark that had killed her. Because actually, one of the things that had happened was that the coroner had actually, I think, been pressured by the mayor to change his ruling. He actually changed it to a boating accident, the cause of death of Chrissy, and of course, we all know that that's not the case. But they but he was like, yeah, this is a shark, and he got really he was getting really intense about it, and then one of the now what we're cutting to here is the fishermen who were showing were going out trying to go shark hunting for it. The fishermen had caught a shark. We don't really know if it's the shark, but they just like, oh yeah, they found a shark. So, but essentially what now this is actually kind of an interesting behind the scenes story here, because apparently the shark here is actually a real shark. That this is a real shark on screen that they're using, and I will admit, I don't think you could have done that nowadays. I think that was kind of a product of the 70s that they were able to get a real shark there. Now it's kind of interesting is that it's really kind of interesting. It's because they're so Hooper is talking to some of the fishermen, and they are and they're talking, and Hooper is talking, and Hooper comes to the conclusion that this is probably not the shark that it ate the and he's basically saying the odds are not there that this would actually be the shark. And basically what he says is it kind of showed him measuring out the mouth of the shark, and he's basically saying that yeah, the bite radius of these don't match the victims, which I will admit, I mean, of course, I will say this, I am not a shark expert. I know nothing, very little to none about, sharks or marine biology or, the study of, even of shark bites or any of that kind of thing. So I don't really know how, because I don't really know how they would have measured up, because I mean, basically the remains of the Chrissy Watkins were very much just completely mutilated. I don't know if they would have been able to ascertain that, but of course, I don't know. So yeah. So now what they're recommending them do is actually no. What Hooper wants to do is he wants to cut open the shark, which they will actually do later. But what they're doing now, what this scene now is, it's actually this is actually a very famous scene in the film, because it's actually Lee Fierro, who is a obviously the Martha's Vineyard native that I had talked about earlier, who's Mrs. Kittner, Alex Kittner's mother. She goes up to Chief Brody and basically slaps him in the face, and it's kind of interesting because I do believe they had to do that slap, I think, about 30 takes. I think it took them 30 takes to get that slap done correctly, which I think Roy Scheider said it was probably one of the most painful days of shooting that he had ever done in his life. And so, yeah, I mean, and it's actually really interesting kind of in the later years after Jaws, Lee Fierro would have a lot of fans, young men, which she would say was me, mostly young men. I mean, I don't know if there would be any others in there, but according to her own story, there would be a lot of people that would come up and ask her to, slap them in the face. And for a while, she would actually, do it. And then I do believe about a couple years ago, back in 2013, I think it was when it was maybe even a longer ago than that, but she actually kind of stopped having people, she actually kind of stopped slapping people. She was like, yeah, I'm not going to slap people anymore. It's just, something, that I don't want to do. So, yeah. So yeah, that was a really intense scene there. And also, just notice this here, you really see the torment that it has on Brody. I mean, you kind of get a little bit of characterization here. I mean, he's a guy you know, he's really trying his hardest. He's to do the right thing, and he's got a lot of pressure on both sides. From the mayor and from the townspeople, and he's really and he feels guilty about the not being able to protect that little Kittner boy that got taken by the shark. Now, this is a really interesting scene here. It's his son. His younger son actually is kind of copying him, and some people say that it's a really cute little scene, between the both of them. And I think it's really just kind of uplifting for Chief Brody. That's just something I kind of like. And I kid you not, I actually just thought about this, like watching it now, and that's kind of it's the beauty of movies. You get something new out of basically every single time that you watch a movie. So, not a whole lot to talk about in this scene right here. They're making like monster faces at each other. So, I think Matt Hooper is actually coming over to. Matt Hooper is coming over to eat for dinner and a drink with the Brodies. Because basically, what's going to end up happening was they're gonna drink, have a couple drinks, and go down and cut open the shark, to see if there was actually like any like human remains in there. So it's funny, like Matt Hooper brings like a couple bottles of wine, and I love it. It's kind of show it in a second here, but Hooper actually, I think there's a plate of food in front of Brody, and Hooper actually takes the plate of food and he just puts it in front of himself and he's like just starts eating it, which I find it kind of funny. So. Bit of an awkward silence at first, so it's kind of funny. I also really like the friendship or kind of the camaraderie ship that the Brody and Hooper kind of start creating here, because you get it's just definitely again, going back to the three main actors. I think one of the things that I keep saying that the film wouldn't be able to be made by either one of them without any of them in the film, or if one of them was out of the film, then I don't think the film would have been nearly as successful. But I think it's just the chemistry that they have and the relationships that they're able to kind of portray on screen. I think is just something that that is really that just makes the film, I think, just amazing, because it is a great film. Although some people would disagree with that. Now, this is a really interesting scene for what I think it's representing, or for what I think it's kind of doing, acting as a placeholder. It's not really an interesting scene. It's basically just like a little dinner scene with Matt Hooper basically explaining to Ellen Brody why he is so into the study of sharks and marine biology, and I believe the term for studying sharks is like ichthyology or something like that, like ichthyologist or something like that. Calling back to the book Jaws, there was actually a little bit of a side plot in there in which Matt Hooper and Ellen Brody had an affair. And one of the things that I think the scene is kind of referring to is that there was supposed to be like a little bit more to Brody and Hooper in in the story, but ultimately when they were when they were making the film and kind of writing the screenplay of the film, they decided to kind of chop out a lot of the different subplots of the film and kind of go for more of a streamlined like A to B plot, adventure flick. Because there are a lot of different side plots in the book that that ultimately just kind of got cut, and I'll talk about. I think there's the affair with Chief Brody, and then there was something with the mafia and the mayor, but I'll try and hit on that one just a little bit later. I try to keep it like in tune with the film. I don't want to get too much ahead of myself. I try to talk about what's on screen and what I think about that. So again, I going back to the whole they had an affair in the book thing. It actually is also interesting to note that one of the things that they wanted to do with the movie was that they wanted to make the characters a lot more like relatable and likable, and they wanted to have people root for the characters, but what ended up because in the book, according to Steven Spielberg, he was essentially rooting for the shark because the characters in the book were just apparently just so unlikable, and that was one of the big like kind of I think one of the main criticisms of the book when it came out, because again it was a bestseller for a while, and you would have a lot of people that really liked the book. However, I think that was just kind of one thing about it, was that the human characters were just not as well portrayed or well written in the book or something like that. So. Alright, sorry, but there was a bit of a cut in the audio there. I got interrupted a little bit. So again, back to the movie. So we are watching Hooper essentially dissect this tiger shark that he is that they are they captured. And one of the things that they that Hooper says in the movie that actually is actually true is that the digestive systems of a shark are actually very, very slow, and that that the remains of the human victims would have actually been inside of the shark. So and as Hooper finds out that there are no human remains inside the shark there. And basically what he's saying there is that the shark is still out there and that it's got a really big mouth. One of the things. Now actually the remains aspect of a shark that actually came into play when during the 1916 New Jersey shark attacks, which the story of Jaws is somewhat based upon actually. When the New Jersey shark attacks lasted from July 1st to July 12th in 1916, over that span of days, you had 4 people. They had 5 people that were attacked by a shark, and then 4 of them were killed. 4 killed, and it was about 4 days later that a man by the name of Michael Schleicher had actually caught a shark, and he he was a taxidermist, so he had actually had some medical history in cutting open animals and that kind of thing. And one of the things that he stated when he was cutting open the shark that he had caught was he cut open the inside, and basically he had pulled out a whole bunch of what he had said is of like a whole bunch of material that was not fish. And then he actually started pulling out like some hard material, like bone. So it was kind of like that instance of like yes, the sharks, in digestive tract is actually very kind of slow. And now for that specific purpose of the New Jersey shark attacks, it's actually been kind of up for debate of whether or not that was the actual shark. Because the bones or the human remains have actually since been lost. And so they were never really able to confirm whether or not those were the actual victims that were, they were killed in that. But again, it's just kind of like something, that Hooper said here that I just thought was really interesting. And I actually had just watched a documentary on the 1916 shark attacks just recently here. So, basically, setting the scene for y'all, we are on a boat. We're on Matt Hooper's boat, and he and Brody are basically going out. I think they're trying to find the shark, actually. And essentially what's going on is they're looking for, they're looking for the shark, and then all of a sudden they come up to a boat, which is confirmed to be Ben Gardner's boat. Now, Ben Gardner, again, is the man that was played by Craig Kingsbury. He helped He helped Matt Hooper, onto the dock, when he got into town. Um, Now he's only in the scene for the movie for a couple bit. I mean, they say here that that's Ben Gardner's boat. That's Ben Gardner's boat, of course. And we never really understand like why it is, and we never really understood like the importance of that's Ben Gardner's boat. That's Ben Gardner's boat. That kind of thing. Um, but I believe in the book, Ben Gardner actually has a much bigger role than what he has in the film. Because only in the film, he's only quite literally in the film for I think like literally 20 seconds. Um, he's not in the film for very long. Now Richard Dryfeuss is now going into the water. Matt Hooper, which I will admit, he's saying that nothing's going to happen, which I will admit that is risky to say because you do know that there is a shark out there that has killed 2 people. So that's just me. Now, this scene here is actually really interesting because so this is the scene under the water in which Hooper is checking out the underside of the hull of Ben Gardner's boat. This scene was actually shot not in the ocean, which with the majority of the film was shot, but it was actually shot in a tank at Universal Studios with Matt Hooper, with Richard Dryfeuss, I do believe, in scuba gear, looking at the wrecked part of the boat there, and and what ended up happening when they were editing the film, Steven Spielberg got a little bit greedy. He said, I think I can get one more scare out of this movie. I can get one more scare here. So what he decided to do, and it's going to be the scene right and now in which the head of Ben Gardner floats out of the boat. Now, the way that they did that was actually, I think for me, a bit of filmmaking ingenuity, and I think not genius, but it was really interesting kind of how they got that shot done. So basically, they had shot the scenes at Universal Studios, I think in the tank of which, in which Hooper explores the underside of the boat, and he was like, I want to figure out, I want to get another way of, I want to get like one more scene here that I can film here. And I think he almost had to finance this scene by himself because I think Universal Studios up until this point, at this point, the budget was just way overblown and it was just not even, I think Universal Studios was just not even, there was no chance in them giving him more money. So, and he didn't have access to like any tanks to film it in. But basically, what they ended up doing was they actually, like, I think rebuilt the wrecked wrecked hull that they had at Universal, and they took it to the film editor Verna Fields' swimming pool, and they essentially put it in her swimming pool, and then to simulate like the murky waters of the Atlantic Ocean, they literally just like poured milk into the swimming pool. So yeah, so I mean that to me is a bit of like filmmaking, and it just kind of a bit of what goes into making a movie. I mean, it's not all like it's not all about just like big fancy sets. I mean, shoot, they get scenes like done in swimming pools essentially. So now I love this scene here. It's so this scene that I've been talking over, it's the Matt Hooper and Roy and Chief Brody, they're talking to the mayor Larry Vaughn about trying to close the beaches down, and they're saying, y'all, we need to close the beaches down, and we need to hire somebody to kill this shark. Now, going back to what I said earlier about the novel and about how like the mayor had like these different mob connections, in the book the mayor had actually, I think he had leased, or the mafia had actually bought some Amity Island, which is where the film is being taken place on Amity Island. They actually had bought like some Amity Island like real estate, so the mayor was under like constant pressure to like actually get this, to keep the real estate money up and like keep a steady cash flow going in. But what ended up happening was because of that, he was forced to keep the beaches open. Now that was in the book. In this film, that's one of the many subplots that they cut out when writing the book. Well, no, writing the screenplay. My bad. But again, you don't really need it because you still understand his kind of his thinking about it per se. You can kind of understand that's like, if we shut the beaches down, he's basically just kind of like burying his head in the sand. He's just kind of, denying the problem, I think, because it's like, well, we need to keep the beaches open, and, it was just a fluke accident, we need to keep the beaches open to get the money in, we need to keep the beaches to get the money in, he doesn't really care about safety, that kind of thing, so, you can kind of see it from there, but again, I'm also glad that they got rid of the subplot, because, again, the film, and I think that's also another great thing about the film, and I've said a lot of great things about it, but it's just kind of the streamlined kind of nature about how the film is just really just focuses on basically like the main characters and their fight with the sharks. So yeah. So now it is the 4th of July in the film, and there are a lot of and they're basically a lot of tourists starting to come in. You got all these like ferries, bringing people onto the island, and it is now they're now going to cut to like a scene on the beach, and there are a whole bunch of and obviously got a lot of people on the beaches that are not really going into the water, obviously because they know about the sharks. They don't want to do that. Now they got like a whole bunch of like in a perimeter basically set up around the island here, around the swimming beach. Now this is a really interesting cameo right here. There's a cameo of a news reporter on the beach, and they're essentially like talking about there's a shark there. The news reporter there is actually Peter Benchley, who wrote the book Jaws. And that's actually kind of something I wanted to get into, because I'm not going to lie, basically it's just kind of some beach scenes here. I'm kind of trying to find something to talk about. But I wanted to talk about the kind of the writing process of Jaws and how it got made from a book to a screenplay, because it's actually two very different kind of mediums, like writing a novel to trying to write a screenplay, which is something that's going to be adapted for a movie. So Peter Benchley actually wrote 3 drafts of a screenplay of Jaws, and none of them were quite satisfactory. So what ended up happening was they actually had another a playwright come on to write it, to help write the screenplay. A playwright by the name of Howard Sackler, who had written. There's actually I don't know a lot of Howard Sackler's plays or credits, but one of the main things that he had written was the thing that I know that he written was he actually wrote the movie Fear and Desire, which is actually Stanley Kubrick's first ever feature film. However, Howard Sackler, he was only on the film for didn't write a whole lot of it. He didn't have a whole lot of time to direct to the film, so he actually asked to be uncredited. So if you actually look at the writers, like what the film, who wrote the film, you'll actually see it was essentially Peter Benchley, the novelist, and then they finally were able to get writer Carl Gottlieb on, who became basically the main writer of the film. And he also plays the main newsman, the main news editor, Meadows, who we've actually seen a little bit in the film up until this point. He's basically kind of like a heavier set man with a bit of a mustache, and that's Carl Gottlieb playing that. he also says that's one of the most difficult decisions he's ever had to make when doing when writing when writing anything, was essentially like writing his own character out of the film. So now we're all these like different like scenes at the beach and all these like different like scenes in the water. And one of the things that I really like about it is the cinematography here. You get a lot of scenes that are quite literally like at the water line, and you got some scenes right here that are under the water, and they actually created these different these different like these contraptions of like housing the cameras like in like these black boxes that they could put under the water. They could literally put it at the water line, like at the where the water line goes to the horizon, and it just kind of adds to that like just like that sense of that you're drowning kind of thing. Like that's what like Steven Spielberg says. I want the people to feel like they're drowning. Not like not like in the literal term, but it's like that sensation of you're like barely keeping your head above the water. I know that sounds kind of I know that sounds a little perhaps a little harsh, but I mean that's just that was kind of the vibe that Spielberg was going for. There's also a great sound design there as well, because I mean because basically whenever you get the water kind of goes over the camera, the sound always kind of cuts off and on and cuts off and that kind of thing. So so now it appears that they have spotted a shark, and now everybody's getting kicked into action. They're gonna go, trying to get everybody out of the water, all that kind of stuff. So now we'll find out that basically what is known as the shark is essentially the is basically the basically just a bunch of kids like just doing the just kind of with a cardboard fin. Which I will admit, yeah, not to say like the stigma of sharks. I mean, because I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I feel like if you had a lot of people like in the ocean that they would see a shark, they would immediately freak out, even if they had seen like even if they had seen like some kind of fin of a shark, or they had seen like like the outline of a shark. I think they would have been they've been really freaked out. So I mean, I honestly don't think that. Do I think it's plausible that some kids would do this? I think yes, because I mean, by and large, I mean, like you get little kids and they make these not very good decisions. But I don't think it's. But you're gonna get what ends up happening here is you're gonna get a bunch of people on boats like pointing guns at you, which again, I mean, I know made in the 70s. I don't think that would have happened today where they had a scene in which you had a whole bunch of police officers with guns aimed at kids in the water. But again, that's just kind of a product of the 70s, I believe. However, now we are it looks like that we have another shark spotted, and now they're saying that it's in the what's called the pond, which is, I think it's just like another area of the beach on Amity Island. But I think that's actually, for Chief Brody, that's actually the personal part of the film. I mean, he had his son go over to the pond because he thought that was the safer part. However, that we all know that, the shark went over there, so. Now, this is actually like this scene will be the first, like, real close-up of the shark that we actually see. And it's kind of, we see the shark kind of go. We see, and there's like the Boy Scout, kind of the troop leader in his boat, and then like Michael, like Chief Brody's son, gets knocked out of his boat. And then here you see the shark. You kind of see the shark for the first time. Yeah, because you see him kind of like right here, and he kind of grabs the Boy Scout troop leader, and he basically devours him underneath the water. Now there was actually a deleted scene here that that Steven Spielberg actually cut out because he thought again it was too was quote unquote gruesome. And basically what it was is that the man that the Boy Scout leader that had gotten eaten, he essentially had gotten caught in the mouth of the shark, and he actually grabbed Michael, again Chief Brody's son, and he kind of, and as the shark was carrying the man grabbed Michael, and he was kind of able to like push him away from the shark and get him to like safety, that kind of thing. And again, it was kind of the whole, like, you know, it was too gruesome for the movie, and it was obviously, I mean, it was, you know, just maybe it didn't look right according to Spielberg, but I mean, it was just something that was again, I mean, that was probably an unnecessary, you know, part that they probably cut out, which, you know, I agree with. So I also really like this scene, this little shot right here. I mean, he's got Chief Brody looking out to the ocean. He basically is, you know, you kind of know that, you know, that's where the film is going to head, and, you know, you basically is like, yeah, we need to. He knows. I was like, I need to go out to the ocean and kill this damn shark. So, all right. So we're now at the hospital. And this is actually where Chief Brody, he's actually gonna, this is where he's gonna be able to get the mayor in order to sign off on the he's basically gonna get the mayor to sign off on the little like kind of release saying that he can actually go and hire Quint the shark hunter. And one of the things, I didn't know what I was gonna say about that, but you can obviously see that, you know, the mayor is, you know, really shaken about it. And I think I don't want to say it makes you sympathize with the mayor, but I mean, I think it just makes you see that he's like, you know, more human, you know, because again, up until this point, I mean, you don't like this guy at all, because I mean, he basically is just throwing caution to the wind. It's like, yeah, we'll keep the beaches open, and I don't really care that, you know, there are people dying and that kind of thing. But you see that, like, he's really affected by it, and he's really, you know, he's really traumatized by it. I mean, even though it didn't really happen to him, he even said the thing like, you know, my son was on the beach as well, and he, and you know, he saw that as well. So I mean, it was very, I think again, traumatizing for both of them. So. However, you see Brody's a little bit more like a man of action. He's just like, you know, just sign the damn form so I can go out and hire Quint the shark hunter, and so we can kill that shark. So now we are being brought over to what looks like Quint's like little shack. Actually, it basically looks like a shack that I think Quint lives in, and as you can see, it's like decorated with like shark jaws, and like it looks like that, you know, Quint's been gone like all kinds of shark hunting, and that he's killed a whole bunch of sharks in his time. So now the role of Quint, played by Robert Shaw, the late great Robert Shaw, it was actually the actors that were considered for Quint. There were actually a couple actors that were considered for Quint. One of the actors was an actor by the name of Lee Marvin, who I'm not very familiar with. Lee Marvin, I don't think I've ever seen a movie with Lee Marvin in it, or if I have, I didn't recognize him, or he didn't really jump out to me. Another actor who I actually do know, and I've seen him in a couple films that I actually really like, is the actor Sterling Hayden, and who to play the role of Quint. And Sterling Hayden he was General Jack D. Ripper in Dr. Strangelove, who is the crazed general that basically almost caused the nuclear Armageddon, who actually did cause a nuclear Armageddon in Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick's famous black comedy about the nuclear arms race. He also was I think he was a con man. I think the con man named Johnny in another Kubrick movie called The Killing, and so he was, Sterling Hayden had been an established actor up until this point. However, and I think Sterling Hayden was actually interested in playing the role of Quint. However, he owed the U.S. government millions of dollars in back taxes, so he wasn't really interested in basically working for the government because the government would just seize his salary and just take it for all the taxes that he owed. So he essentially just turned the role down from that, and then it ultimately was David Brown and Richard Zanuck, Zanuck and Brown, that actually came to Spielberg about casting Robert Shaw, who had just starred in the in Zanuck and Brown's 1973 Oscar winner, The Sting, which I do believe The Sting was I think it was a Best Picture winner. I'm not terribly sure, but Robert Shaw played a mobster in that film, and he was really good. I've never seen The Sting, seen only just kind of bits and pieces of it, but Robert Shaw was they had worked with him, and they knew how good Robert Shaw was, and also Robert Shaw was according to some people, he was probably the most intimidating Bond villain that Sean Connery ever faced in some of those early James Bond films. So he was obviously the man for the job, and it's kind of funny because Robert Shaw, he actually does not talk like this in real life. He's actually he's an English actor, and he got a very distinct English accent. You don't really hear it in the film. You kind of get he plays the accent really well, and he plays the part really well. It's just kind of this grizzled, shark hunter, so. And again, as I've said it once, and I'm going to say it again, I mean, if Robert Shaw was not in this movie, it would not have been nearly as good. Same with Roy Scheider, and same with Richard Dryfeuss. I mean, it's just these. I will stick to that. I think some people might disagree. They're like, oh, Robert Shaw, he's not really good, or Roy Scheider, not really good, but I disagree with that. Now, interesting here is the actors Roy Scheider the actors Richard Dryfeuss and Robert Shaw actually developed quite a bit of a feud off screen. It wasn't like anything nasty. It was just kind of, I think, like a bit of professional competition, because during the filming of this movie, during the filming of Jaws, which lasted a long time, I'll get into that a little bit later, but during the filming, they were, the Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz had been released, and essentially, Richard Dryfeuss was getting like rave reviews for his performance, and he was, according to the story, he was kind of like talking about how, like, oh man, why am I making this movie? I'm better than this, and blah blah blah, and Robert Shaw didn't really like that, so he thought that Dryfeuss kind of needed like a little bit of a kind of like a like slap back down to earth or that kind of thing. And what else was I gonna say about it? Robert Shaw and Richard. I mean, they would do like Robert Shaw, like they were just competitive about like all these little things. Like, I mean, Robert Shaw would bet Richard Dryfeuss like all these like these. I'd bet you $100 that you wouldn't go to the top of the orca and jump off, and they were saying like Richard Dryfeuss. I mean, you can't even do 10 good push-ups, and all that kind of stuff. So they were really just kind of like competitive, and there were some like times where they got into like altercations, because I think apparently one of the stories was that Robert Shaw, who was a very well known drunk, had essentially come on. He was kind of stumbling down the gangplank onto the boat of the orca, I do believe, and he held out his like shot glass to Richard Dryfeuss, and he's like, give me a hand, will you, Richard? And I think Richard Dryfeuss literally took the shot glass and just threw it out, and then I think a brawl started after that. So now that's actually really interesting. So now we're out to sea. The three main actors on the boat and on the Orca now, and we are now out at sea trying to catch that shark. And one of the things that Quint stated was that the that he had caught a shark off of Montauk. Now, as I stated earlier, one of the main inspirations for the movie of Jaws was actually a big shark that had been caught off of Montauk, New York. Now it's actually kind of interesting because the fisherman who had caught that shark, who Peter Benchley I think knew very well, the fisherman was actually considered by a lot to be an inspiration for the character of Quint, like the actual written character of Quint in the book. Peter Benchley denied this, and who knows what the validity of it is, but it's just kind of an interesting backstory. And it's just, I think, a nice little tidbit of the film, of that little line there that caught this big shark off of Montauk and blah blah blah. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Now, one of the interesting aspects of the book of the movie Jaws is that it was actually filmed on the real Atlantic Ocean. All these scenes right here that we are showing of them at the ocean are on the real Atlantic Ocean. Now, it actually goes into the idea of why they actually picked Martha's Vineyard to film Jaws. Obviously, for Amity Island, they wanted to have a film. They wanted to have a town, resort town that basically could function as like that little resort town kind of vibe. And what they also had to do is they had to have a place where the beaches and the oceans had 25 to 30 foot sandy bottoms in which they could actually kind of hook up their little shark platform and shark device. And the waters off of Martha's Vineyard allowed them to do so. Now, for those of you that don't know how filming is done, not trying to be condescending on that, that sounded a little condescending. I apologize, but for those of you maybe unfamiliar, the filming industry is very control freaks, and they're very we have to go by schedule, by the book, and we need to do everything that we can control. The one thing that man has tried to control, I mean, not to get too philosophical here, but one of the things that man has tried to control on Earth is they have tried to control nature and tried to control the elements. And one thing that they could not control in this film was how one thing that they could not control was, how the ocean would react and how the tides and the weather would react and whatnot. And nobody really wanted to film on the ocean except for Steven Spielberg. I mean, he really was going for that authentic look, of the film, because obviously, and he said it, which is obviously true. Ocean water, lake water, pond water, tank water is extremely different than pond water is very different from ocean water. Different types of water is different. So I think in that aspect, I actually really like the idea because it really gives the film an authentic feel. Like, yeah, these guys are out to sea, and these guys are on the ocean, and it looks real, And of course, nothing in this movie was done digitally. I mean, nothing in this movie was a digital effect. All the visual effects that they both of the all the visual effects done on this film were done were done, like in camera, like you're done like by some practical effect. So they're trying to they're getting so Quint has now got so Quint's got this giant fishing pole, and they're trying to pull they're trying to pull they had like something attached to the other side of it, and they were trying to pull the fishing line out. And what ended up happening was is that whatever did it. Now it's actually kind of interesting because what Quint is talking about here is he's actually referring to a deleted scene that was in the film, in which he actually went to this music store and he had actually bought this type of like piano wire that would go on pianos. And what he did to that was he actually, I think he would tie it to the end of his fishing line, and as big sharks and whatnot, and as the fish would eat it, they would eat the piano wire, and they would choke on it, which I think MythBusters tried that, and I'm not trying to say that MythBusters is the be all end all of science, but it was very interesting kind of idea that you use piano wire in order to like choke sharks and choke fish and that kind of thing. But but one of the things that had happened in that scene there is like they had the big fishing pole and they were trying to pull whatever was attached to the other end out of there, and it ended up kind of going away, and it kind of snapped up, and the fishing pole was like duh, they pulled it out. And what it showed is that whatever was on the other line had basically eaten through or bitten through the piano wire there. Which I was actually kind of interested by, that they actually kind of kept that scene in the film. This scene, at least, the whole piano wire scene, because they actually got rid of the earlier scene in which they introduced Quint at the music shop, but which I think it would have played a little bit better if they had left it in the film, but I mean overall they didn't. So now Brody is at the stern of the ship. He is chumming the waters, and then the shark appears. And that is the first best look of the shark that we get in this film. And Brody backs up to Robert Shaw, and he says, "We're going to need a bigger boat." Now, it's of course one of the most famous lines basically in all of movie history. It was, I do believe, ad-libbed by Roy Scheider on set, and kind of an interesting editing note. What happened with that is that they actually had to extend the length of when the shark kind of frightened Brody to when he backed up to Robert Shaw and to Quint and basically was like, "Hey, you need to get a bigger boat," that kind of thing. And because what ended up happening was that when the shark appears, people started to scream, and they were like screaming, cheering, that kind of thing. And they were screaming so much is that they couldn't even hear they couldn't hear the line. And Steven Spielberg and them thought that it was a great line to keep in the film. So what they did was they basically like added more of like Brody kind of backing up to the bridge of the boat, and then they kind of added on that scene so that you could actually hear it. So they kind of tried to delay it, so that the screams could like die down, and then they would be able to hear it. So now they have finally spotted the shark, and another interesting, the shark is kind of circling the boat, and Quint is getting his harpoon gun out in order to fire at it, and one of the things that was being said between Hooper and Quint was they were trying to compare the size of the shark, and they, and Hooper says is that, oh my gosh, that's a 20-foot long shark, and and then Quint says is no, that's a 25-foot shark, and that is interesting in its own right because I do believe the longest great white shark is just under 20 feet. I do believe, yeah, to 20 feet. But because the majority of sharks the majority of great white sharks are actually 15 to 16 feet now. The 25-foot long shark is, I think it's an indicator that it's a bit of an exaggerated monster. But it's also because at the end of the day it's a kind of a monster movie, but in some ways it's also not. I mean, it's also like it's like a suspense thriller, with a shark as your main antagonist. But it's also really interesting because the shark, the thing is like, I mean, it's really plausible that there could be a great white shark out there that is 25 feet long, because there are some really big great white sharks out there. And of course, obviously, we have prehistoric sharks, like the megalodon and the Ginsu shark that were very large and a lot bigger than 25 feet long. But of course, the shark in Jaws. I mean, they gave it some exaggerated powers. I mean, you kind of saw that from like the pulling the dock out, and we're gonna see it like later on here, like with the barrels. With these yellow barrels, these iconic yellow barrels. So yeah. And basically, like, what the shark's going to do is he's going to pull these yellow barrels underneath, and they actually tested this they actually did a whole MythBusters episode of stuff that sharks could do on Jaws, and one of the things that they determined was that a shark technically could keep a barrel underwater, but he probably wouldn't be able to keep it underwater for very long. So yeah. And the shark has just now pulled the barrel under the water. Now the thing is, the barrels are trying to keep the shark above water. They're trying to basically wear the shark out, because the shark wants to go under the water, and the barrel is trying to basically pull him to the surface. It's like a flotation barrel. And again, that's also kind of one of those things, like the barrels are basically there to kind of imply that the shark is there. Because again, the shark basically for almost the entire production just would not work properly. I do remember hearing, I think, a quote, I think it was during a documentary of the inside story of Jaws, is that basically the final film of Jaws is basically every single frame of usable shark footage that they could have possibly gotten, because that's just how much the shark just would not work. It's just they just would not work. And the thing is also they had never really tried the shark out in the salt waters of the real ocean, so it just would go belly up a lot of the times. And not only that, I mean not only that, I mean, you'd basically have like the currents and the tides of the ocean that would move the boats around, and that would mess up the shots that way. Or what you would also have is you'd have like these little sailboats in the background that would mess up the shot itself. So yeah, I mean, filming on the ocean, I mean, no joke for these guys. I mean, that's what really caused this film to have the strenuous production that it did, because they were quite literally fighting the ocean, fighting the Atlantic Ocean, fighting mechanical problems, fighting like weather problems basically every single day. And making a movie on its own is difficult without all those things, and then you add on all these different factors, and it's just just almost impossible. So now I will say this scene right here, I went back. So this is that other scene that I said is like if you wanted to basically encapsulate why one scene in the movie Jaws of why it's such a great movie, I would say this scene right here. So it's basically the scene during the night. Quint and Hooper are actually comparing shark. They're comparing like different scars and of like fish bites, shark bites, all that kind of stuff. So. And so they're basically, just comparing all their stuff, and it's to me, it's just such a great like characterization of of Hooper and Hooper and Quint, and especially just in a second here, Quint, because so Quint is actually about to tell us the story of something that basically Quint's about to tell us the story of why he actually became the grizzled shark hunter that he is. And he's basically going to say, Mr. Hooper, that's the USS Indianapolis. And I want to wait till he says it here to start talking about it. And then you kind of see that, you kind of hear the tone of the scene really change when Hooper says, "You were on the Indianapolis," and then Brody asks what happened, and then Quint starts talking about it. Now, this scene is, I'd say, probably the most. I mean, I'd say acting wise, it's probably the most intense acting scene of the entire movie. And obviously, it's Robert Shaw that just completely takes just knocks it out of the park with his performance here, but. Basically, what the scene is saying is like that Quint is essentially a guy driven to hunt and kill sharks because he had such a terrible experience on the USS Indianapolis. Now, now in real life, the USS Indianapolis was an actual battle. It was I don't know the type of ship it was. I think it was. It wasn't an aircraft carrier, but basically. Yeah, I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna look it up here real quick. But yeah, no, it was a battle cruiser for the Navy back in the 30s and 40s, and that were in which it fought in World War II. And what ended up happening was they on its final mission, which was a super top level, beyond classified mission, they delivered the delivered the components of the atom bomb Little Boy, which would later be dropped on Hiroshima, or Hiroshima. I don't exactly know the pronunciation. And on the way back, they dropped the bomb off on Tinian, on the island of Tinian, and they're going back to this other island of Leyte, I think it was. And on their way back, they had a Japanese submarine that launched 2 torpedoes and quite literally almost cracked the ship in half. And in 12 minutes, the ship sank, and essentially 1,100 men were thrown into the water. And those were very heavily shark-infested waters, and there were a lot of sharks that came around, and there were a lot of men that were attacked by sharks. Not every men that was, and there were a lot of men that went down with the ship that died on the explosion. A lot of people that and they also would die from like because those men that would die from like exposure to the elements, because the men in the ocean were actually they were adrift for like 4 or 5 days. I mean, they were at ocean for quite a while there, and they're just adrift at sea and waiting for rescue. And again, no distress signal had been sent because again, it was such a heavily classified mission, and nobody really knew. I think it was quite literally they were spotted and then finally rescued, and again, it's just it's such a harrowing story because the real life story of the USS Indianapolis, it had been classified for a long time. So I'm pretty sure you had a lot of family members who sons and husbands and brothers had died on that ship, and they didn't even know why. And then finally it was, then they finally released the story. And released the story because I think they had literally declassified the story of the USS Indianapolis about a year before they made the movie Jaws, which is kind of interesting because the film is not the story or the Indianapolis story is not in the book at all. It's something made directly for the movie. Now, there were multiple writers for this for the Indianapolis speech. I mean, you had all kinds of writers. You had like the playwright Howard Sackler, who I had mentioned earlier. He was the guy that basically introduced the idea of, we have to give Quint like this kind of Captain Ahab kind of vibe to him. We have to give him this origin story of why he hates the shark so much. And then John Milius, who was actually I think a friend of Steven Spielberg, came in and wrote this long speech of it. And then I think Carl Gottlieb tried writing it. Steven Spielberg tried parts of writing it, and then Robert Shaw himself, who is actually a very distinguished shark, who's actually a very distinguished playwright. He got a Robert Shaw kind of took a crack at it, and Robert Shaw basically wrote the version that actually appeared on film here. And Robert is actually kind of an interesting behind the scenes story of how Robert Shaw actually filmed this scene, because the scene is technically taking place at night, and they are essentially what's going on there is oh shoot, what was going on? So yeah, no, the scene's taking place at night, and they're in the like the galley of they're in the galley of the Orca, and they're just kind of having like a little meal there, and they're also having something to drink, and they're apparently supposed to be drinking, and Robert Shaw tried to be realistic with it, and he was and so he asked Steven Spielberg if, hey, can I have like a drink like before we make this scene here? And according to people that were making the film, when he went and when he was finally ready to do the scene, or when it was finally time to do the scene, Robert Shaw was quite literally plastered. So, and then I don't think they used a lot of footage from that first day when he shot the scene, because they basically couldn't shoot the scene because he was just so drunk. And then literally the next day he came in and he did a really great job of doing that scene. So yeah, now we're back on the day side, and they are trying to fix up the Orca, because I think the shark had just come in, and after Quint had finished telling the story, they kind of started like singing like sea shanties, and they were rammed pretty hard by the shark. So now they're trying to fix up the Orca. Now the barrel that that is attached to the shark is reappeared. So, and again, the barrel is just such a great, like, it's kind of an iconic. It's like, that's one of the things that people say, like, it's kind of a curse, a blessing in disguise that the shark itself wouldn't really work, because such iconic scenes, like the barrels, the parts of the film, like the barrels, and the movie, the film score would not have been like I think as impactful as they really are, because you get a lot of people that these yellow barrels, like, oh my gosh, that's like such a great part of the film of the movie Jaws. So it's um so yeah, it's just again kind of interesting. So we have another scene here in which the shark just kind of pops out of the ocean, pops out, and he just tears the line out of Quint's hands, and he just leaves a giant like rope burn on his arm, on his hand. And I really like this this little short scene here because Quint comes into the bridge of the Orca, and he essentially just destroys the radio because Brody's trying to call for help. And it's actually really funny and then Brody just goes like Brody just kind of goes off the hinges there. And then, it's kind of Hooper that has to get him like kind of back on track. He's like, yeah, this shark's kind of coming back and we need to, start, firing at it. I would say this like little segment right here, this is probably the most exciting part of the film because this is definitely like that like action adventure like chase scene in which they're chasing after the shark and Quint's like just firing harpoons into him to try to like hook these barrels up. So he hooks one barrel up. He hooks a barrel back up to him, and then Matt Hooper gets behind the wheel, and then he starts chasing after the shark. Now this is a great scene. The one thing I'll say about this scene here is it's really the music that I'm a big fan of because they're because like we know the theme of Jaws, like the very iconic theme. It's like the shark theme, but this scene right here, it's very much like what I would say like something more akin to like a pirate movie. Like, I mean, if you were like watching like a pirate movie and they were like doing like a movie chase there, it's like you were watching like an old style like 50s movie like with pirates, and that's basically what I'm getting from this, the music in this scene here. I think it also just is a great testament to how like versatile of a film score writer, film score composer that John Williams is. And so they're just chasing after the shark, the barrel's turning, and it's just such a cut. It's like really just like just such a really like fun scene, because they're just chasing after him, and they're yelling. Like, it's just such, I don't know, I just really like this scene. I'd say it's probably like my favorite scene in the movie here, where they're just chasing after the shark, and they're just a long chase into the ocean, and the shark is just going really fast. So now he's got two barrels hooked up to him, and then he's going to be able to drag the barrels underneath the water. Which again, that's probably not something that any shark should be able to do there. Now the orca boat that they're actually on, I'll try and hit this up. That's actually a real boat. Actually, I think they actually found that boat somewhere, and they actually, I think, renamed it or repurposed it as the Orca. And it was a boat that functioned. It wouldn't run and all that kind of stuff. It would sail. And what also happened is that they also built a second boat for the Orca. A second boat titled the Orca, and that was the boat that was technically supposed to sink. And then, however, according to one of the a famous story in the movie, a famous story of behind the scenes kind of mishaps, I think they were actually filming this scene here in which the shark had actually where the shark actually kind of pulls on the boat. But apparently what happened was that they were trying to tow the orca in such a way in which it kind of knocks the men off their feet, and it looks like the shark is like kind of like pulling them and that kind of thing. But what ended up happening was they actually like pulled out like a big plank of the underside hull of the orca, and it caused the real orca, the boat orca, to start to sink. And according to the behind the scenes stories, they were telling them, it's like, well, the orca's apparently sinking, and then one of the production assistants was like, apparently sinking, the thing's going down like a rock. I mean, and it's one of the funnier scenes. It's also kind of it's a funny story as well, because you basically had like Steven Spielberg on like a big giant bullhorn yelling, "Get all the actors off the boat! Get the actors off the boat!" And the boat's just going down like a stone. I will say, I'm also glad. Another thing that I'm glad why they didn't show the shark in the movie as well is because it's kind of easy to show that it's fake, especially in some of these scenes right here. You can kind of tell that the shark is fake, and you're kind of glad that you don't see it a whole lot. I mean, I think it's not seeing the shark a whole lot really kind of, I think it adds to its realism, because, I mean, of course, if we had just seen like a big rubber mechanical shark, I mean, I don't think we would have, had a great time. I don't think we would have, believed it as much. So they're trying to they're actually trying to untie they tied up the shark harpoon to the stern cleats of the orca, and they're trying to untie them now. But the shark is just so powerful that he's pulling on the stern cleats, and he's and he's trying to they're trying to tie them off because they're going to pull like basically the stern off of the boat, and basically what ended up happening is the shark kind of dragged them back for a couple feet, and it caused a whole bunch of water to get into the engine of the orca. So it was and that'll kind of come into effect, and that'll come into play kind of in a couple seconds here, actually a couple minutes here. You see the orcas. They don't show it explicitly, but the orcas slowly starting to deteriorate. Like the engine's starting to, slowly kind of die out. They're showing them trying to fix the engine up, and they're showing a lot of water going into it, and so it's kind of showing that the orcas. Not that it's a bad, not like it's not like, it's not like a piece of junk, so to say, but it's also trying to it's it's kind of just showing that the orca's like not the most well put together boat out there. So now the shark has dragged the 3 barrels underneath the water, which I will admit, I mean they didn't know that apparently the sharks weren't supposed. I think Hooper's even asking Quint, has this actually ever happened to you before? And Quint is like, no, I've never seen a shark drag these barrels underneath. And actually, I think it's something that was again going back to that MythBusters episode, tested by the MythBusters. They apparently found out that a shark could technically drag those barrels underneath the water. However, they wouldn't be able to have enough power to keep them under the water. So technically, the shark here pulling the barrels underneath the water and is technically plausible, but probably not realistic. Of course, there's also the exaggeration of powers of the shark, because I mean it's just kind of showing that this is not no ordinary great white shark. I mean this is kind of more of your more of your more powerful great white sharks. And I also like how it's also just I also like how basically you're asking all these shark experts have you ever had a great white shark do this before? It's like, nope, Has a great white shark ever chased a boat like this? Nope. Have you ever seen a great white shark, pull these barrels underneath? Nope. I mean, this great white shark just does things that, other sharks just can't do, so. And I love how, like, Quint is just kind of unhinged, and he can kind of see that, because, you know, Quint's trying to, like, the shark is basically chasing after Quint, and he's kind of revving the boat up, and he's trying to revving the orca up, and as you can see, the engine's just not being able to take it very well, and as they're revving it up, because he's going like the full, RPMs that he can go there, and as the boats kept going and going and going and going, the orcas, obviously the engines are gonna, kind of blow up and kind of die out, so, And then, he burns out the bearings and he's like, no, stop the boat. And then I love Hooper's like, stop the boat. Stop the boat. Stop it. In which case, and I never understood that, but I don't know why the engine blew up. But, of course, I don't really know anything about boat mechanics or boat engines or any of that kind of thing. So, and the barrels have now disappeared. Now you're now it's never really stated explicitly in the film here, but it looks to be that the crew are kind of on their last legs here, and that there's not really a whole lot else we can do here, because it looks like that the orca's starting to it's taking a pounding from the shark. It looks like it's starting to sink. I mean, there's a bit of a list going on here. It's taking on a lot of water, and Quint's starting to take these life jackets out and throw them over to Brody and Hooper, and even here you can see that the boat's kind of leaning back a little bit. So this is also kind of the idiocy of Quint here, because if he hadn't busted up his radio, I mean, they would have been able to do it. Call for help and get a boat person out there in order to help them out, because it looks like the ship's kind of sinking right now. But looks like they're essentially on their own. Now it looks like now all other options exhausted. It looks like they're gonna try and put Hooper into the boat, and they're gonna make up this little make up a shark cage for Hooper, and they're gonna put it in the water. And, Hooper's gonna basically try and use this giant harpoon to stab him, with the with this poison, with a whole bunch of this poison. So now this will be a bit of a segue into how into some of the of an interesting behind the scenes story. Now the real life, now in Jaws, a lot of the shark is actually the mechanical shark. However, one thing that Spielberg and Zanuck and Brown decided to do was they wanted to actually film some real life sharks. They wanted to do some real life shark filming. So what they decided to do is they hired a couple, an Australian couple, Ron and Valerie Taylor, who were expert shark divers, shark photographers, and that kind of thing. So they commissioned them to film for sharks. I think it was down in Australia, film great white sharks down there. But one of the caveats about what they were filming was that the majority of the great white sharks that Ron and Valerie Taylor were filming were only about 13 to 16 feet long. They weren't the 25 feet long that we see in the movie here. So bit of a stupid kind of solution that they made, but also, it scaled the shark up, obviously. But one of the things that they did was they were like, well, why don't we have a smaller cage built and you put like a little person in there, like a midget. So they actually commissioned a midget. They made a smaller cage. They commissioned a small person, a midget, essentially, to go down with them and, basically scuba dive. However, the thing is that midget didn't really have any scuba experience and didn't really have, and was deathly afraid of sharks. So it was very hard for him to actually get into the cage, to get that little person into the cage. And they actually had also a little dummy that they could have put into the cage as well, but and I'll get to that. But basically, what ended up happening was that and there's actually going to be footage of it later in the film here. But what ended up happening was that the shark actually got tangled onto the top of the cage there, and it started thrashing around, and just thrashing, trying to break free of all the cables and of the cage there. And they saw the footage and they were like, this is such great footage that, we need to keep this in the movie. We need to use this somehow. And it actually caused a rewrite that actually saved Hooper's life, because originally Hooper was gonna die in the original script. He actually died in the movie, because he went into the cage. The shark attacked him, and then he got eaten. However, because that footage, when they shot the shark, without the cage, without the person in the cage, they were like, we need to use this footage because it's this great looking footage. They thought they couldn't use it at first because, Hooper wasn't in the cage. However, they're like, well, let's use it anyway and just rewrite it to where Hooper, lives. And a lot of these scenes with the mechanical shark are actually filmed in a tank in Universal Studios. So, and it's actually kind of interesting because Ron and Valerie Taylor, the people that photographed the shark, the real life sharks, one of the things that they said was like, when they saw the film, is that they actually couldn't tell, like, at first, which was the real sharks and which was the fake sharks. So and this is the scene right here in which the shark is just thrashing around. And then, Hooper swims away and he hides it out. So and they're trying to pull the cage up to get Hooper out. And then the whole cage apparatus essentially just kind of breaks loose, and then the shark is free. And then you get here that they think that Hooper, looking at it, they think Hooper's died, but because they pull the cage up and the shark is just completely torn it to pieces. So now they think that Hooper's died. This transitions into the final kind of part of the film, in which now the shark is going to leap out of the water onto the stern of the orca and essentially crack the boat in half. Now the boat's kind of starting to tilt back, and Hooper and Quint is kind of holding on to dear life now, and trying to grab Brody's hand, and he slides down to the shark. Now it's kind of interesting. It's interesting callbacks to like the speech that Quint gave about the experience of sharks on the Indianapolis, like the whole the high pitched screaming, the pounding and hollering, and basically how he kind of almost he telegraphed his own death essentially. So Now Quint is being pulled under the water, and Quint is dead. Now, he's actually a bit of a different death in... it's a different ending overall, and Quint's death is different in this movie, in the book, than it is in the movie here. In the book, Quint essentially got his foot tied on a harpoon line. Quint basically, in the book, got his foot caught onto the end of a harpoon line, and as the shark basically went under the water, he just dragged Quint down and, essentially just drowned Quint, which, obviously is not nearly as exciting as, him basically getting devoured by the shark. Now they're showing the final scene. Brody, they're kind of setting it up with Brody. He put like a can of compressed air into the shark's mouth, and kind of alluding to a scene earlier in the film in which Hooper stated that you need to be careful with these tanks, because if you're not, they're going to blow up. And and in real life, I don't think that would have. Real life, it's obviously not the case, but for a movie, it's it's a little differently. But it actually this ending here wasn't well received by Peter Benchley. I mean, he thought that the idea of shooting a can of compressed air and blowing the shark up was not going to be feasible. But one of the things, and he said that it's not realistic. Nobody's going to believe it. But one of the things that Steven Spielberg was like, if I have the audience in my hand already throughout this entire movie for 2 hours, they're gonna believe it if I can blow the shark up. Which I will admit, it's a really interesting scene here. The shark, Brody's just firing at the shark, and it's not trying to aim, trying to fire, and then he fires, hits the tank, and blows the shark up. Now, I will say there's one gripe in watching the Blu-ray version of this final scene. You can actually hear the bullet ricochet off the tank, and it's kind of a more animated sound, and you hear the bullet ricochet, and then that's when it blows up. Now, that's actually I think a different sound mix than the original film, which I'm not a big fan of, but it kind of is what it is. Now, as in with Quint's death, the death of the shark the death of the shark was actually a lot different in the book than it was in the movie. According to the book, in the book, the shark dies basically as a result of his injuries. The shark, he'd done all these harpoon, he had all these harpoons, all this all these injuries, from being hunted by the men and whatnot. And essentially, as in with the scene here, as in the scene just recently, the shark is basically kind of chasing Brody down. And Brody's instead of firing at him, Brody's essentially just kind of sitting there, just kind of accepting death. He's like, yeah, I'm about to die now. And then essentially the shark just kind of dies and turns belly up. So yeah. And then Hooper reappears on the surface and he lives, which I will admit I kind of like Hooper living, because I think it's. Of course, I also like more of a feel-good ending than all of them dying, but that's just me. So that is the ending essentially of the movie. We're about to get into the credits here. Now the credits I really like watching the credits because it's a long, wide, static shot of the beach, and right in the middle of the shot you can see the two actors making landfall, and trying to get they're not making landfall, and that's a stupid thing to say, but they're getting back on the beach. They finally made it, because they basically had to take a couple of those barrels as the flotation devices, and they're basically kicking to the kicking to the shore. And it's just a nice little, like, wide shot of the ending here, and just kind of nice. So Jaws, the legacy, as we're still going through the credits here, obviously, Jaws, it became, one of the most, successful films, of its time. I mean, it became, it was, at the time, it was one of the highest grossing films of all time. It was, it was considered by a lot of people, like one of the first ever, summer blockbusters. I do believe it was the first film ever to gross like 100 million domestically. I do believe, and all basically because it's just all mostly because a great director found a way to tell a story about a shark without essentially showing the shark. Because essentially, like, the shark is, kid you not, in the film for only about 4 or so minutes. I think literally the official time is like 4 minutes and some odd change in seconds. So, and obviously, I mean, and as I've been talking about the brilliance of the three main actors, I think these are the three best roles that they had in their careers. I mean, I don't think Roy Scheider ever did anything as big as what he did in Jaws, and Richard Dryfeuss, he was in Close Encounters with work with Steven Spielberg again after that, and Richard Dryfeuss has been in some good a lot of really great movies, but again, I don't think anything nearly as successful or as well done as what he did in Jaws. And not only that, it made the name Steven Spielberg a household name. I mean, you got to remember, this is 1975 that this movie was released, and nobody essentially knew, outside from basically some small circles in Hollywood, who Steven Spielberg was. So it was a great jumping off platform for him. I mean, it was really, I think, the film that it was what made him a great filmmaker, because I think it really just sharpened his resolve, because he was threatened with being fired almost on a daily basis, because going into I said earlier, going into the schedule and the budget was originally $4 million, around $4 million. The exact number is an unknown figure. It ballooned well up to well over $9 million, so it basically doubled the budget, and then the shooting schedule was over 150 days long, and it was originally scheduled for about 60 days. So he didn't look very good while making it. Then when it was released, they saw this movie and they're like, holy moly, this guy Steven Spielberg is awesome. And then from there, his career skyrocketed. Alright, so the movie is now ended, and I do believe that's all I have to say on it. Again, Jaws, it's one of the most one of the most iconic films, I think, in all of movie history. I mean, it's one of the often cited as one of the great films of all time. Jaws does have, I think, three sequels. I'm not going to get into those. They're not nearly as good of quality as the original, but still great movie, and it's yeah, so that is all that I have for Jaws. Again, this is the first episode of what will basically be like the Halloween theme of October. I'm essentially going to be releasing, hopefully get back onto like my normal schedule of releasing every weekend, essentially, like an episode every weekend. I'm going to try, and literally right after this one, I'm going to do another episode. So it's going to be quite a lot, but hopefully I'll get back onto a bit more of a normal schedule, because I had a lot of stuff come up over the last couple weeks. So anyway, thank you guys for listening / watching on YouTube. Well, it's not really a video, but thanks for watching anyway. Again, the Movie Commentary Podcast, we are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, basically anywhere you can get your podcasts at, YouTube, SoundCloud. So if you like this, just follow us on Instagram, Facebook. I mean, if you like us, um, share a link, on Snapchat, share a link with your friends, all that kind of stuff. I mean, again, but just thank you guys so much for watching. I mean, we're almost up to, I mean, don't know how precise these statistics are, but apparently I almost have 100 people that have 100 downloads of all the episodes that I've made. Almost 100, not almost there, but not 100, but almost 100. So, I never thought that many people would ever listen to this podcast that much, but I mean, I think it's pretty awesome. So again, thank you all for anybody that listens to this. That's where I will leave it. Stay golden out there, y'all, and I will see you on the flip side.